Visual programming is overhated. My name is Marshall Pease, and I'm pursuing a computer science degree with an emphasis in games. I like to explore the intersection of technology and art. Visual programming exists in this intersection. Visual programming is a form of programming that relies on visuals instead of text. These visuals take the form of blocks that are dragged and dropped to create an intuitive flowchart of logic. Visual programming is hated by programmers because of its perceived limitations. However, visual programming matters because it makes programming accessible. There are two major goals in beginner programming classes. The first and most important goal is to develop problem-solving skills. The second goal is to develop a basic understanding of a programming language. Achieving both of these goals is unfortunately an intimidating process. Seeking to understand the syntax and semantics of a programming language is a slippery slope. Beginners want to, but struggle to understand why code looks the way it does. For example, with this C++ program on the left, beginners would often wonder why use a semicolon, where to use a semicolon. Visual programming is able to skip the difficult process of syntax by using visual cues. A common approach is to use jigsaw shapes to make it clear which blocks can connect together, as seen in the Scratch example. According to Kirpan et al., a student's first exposure to code has a significant impact. Confusion can decrease a student's desire to learn. By minimizing syntax, visual programming avoids common pitfalls for beginner programmers. Tools like Scratch is how most people are introduced to programming. Scratch is meant to help students take their baby steps into programming. Because of this association, many programmers see visual programming as immature. Despite these feelings, visual programming isn't limited to beginner-friendly circumstances. It is also used by artists. Visual programming is beneficial to artists because it allows for rapid prototyping. One example of visual programming is seen in GameMaker. GameMaker is a tool for 2D game development. Another example is the Unreal Engine's blueprints. Full video games can be created and fleshed out using visual programming. This lowers the technical skills required to get into game development. Another common place for visual programming is in shader development. Shaders are specialized pieces of code that control how objects in games look. Here's an example of a gross carpet material created in Blender. Here is an example of shader code for a water material. Visual scripting is used for shaders because it gives artists a complex framework that doesn't require learning a text-based language. To illustrate the differences in visual and textual programming for shaders, consider the code shown on the left. This code is absolutely horrifying. And what does it do? Well, these 200 lines of esoteric code produce this single rainbow triangle. Similar to shaders, visual programming is often used in live visuals. A software giant in this field is Touch Designer. Touch Designer allows for rapid development using powerful blocks. Here is an example of Touch Designer being used in a music video for the band Death Cab for Cutie. Touch Designer is responsible for all of the lighting effects.
'Cause when you find yourself the villain in the story you've written, it's plain to see that sometimes the best intentions are in need of redemptions. Would you agree? If so, please show me.
As you can see, Touch Designer does not have beginner prices either. My final example of visual programming is Pure Data. Pure Data is a visual programming language specialized in creating audio. Despite all of these examples, visual programming is still seen as limited. This is because you're limited to the highly abstracted building blocks provided. The designers of visual programming languages have to make a compromise between ease of use and expressiveness. Because of this, visual languages are inherently less expressive than text-based languages. Programmers who are used to text environments get frustrated by this limited flexibility. However, there is a solution to this problem. Hybrid programming is a system in which both text-based and visual-based programming is used. This is the best of both worlds. This example comes from Unreal's blueprint system. In conclusion, visual programming matters because it is accessible to beginners and artists. It has limitations, but solutions exist, such as hybrid programming.